Hello, Foxes. I'm Garrett for Intel.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Jesse Kerfossi, and I'm going to be covering down for all you knuckle dragon fisters out there.
All right, Jesse, you've called us here today to talk about something near and dear to your heart, and that is target acquisition.
Yeah, absolutely, Garrett. Because it's such a misunderstood and misinformed topic between the fires and intelligence communities, right? In the Army. On our fire side, we almost universally associate target acquisition with a single lone capability, right? The process of target acquisition, and that's with our counterfire radars, our Q-53s, our Q-50s out there, and actually they're weapons locating radars in the current doctrine, but same, right? The idea that you can put a target acquisition asset that belongs directly, organically to the field artillery commander. They can maneuver them in the battle space to cover their most likely uh, enemy locations where the enemy will be massing their indirect fire assets, their artillery, their rockets, their mortars. And the entire concept of this is to facilitate the counterfire mission, right? So I know, or I suspect, where the enemy will be massing artillery, batteries, battalions, regiments, brigades. I'm going to deliberately position my radars so the fans can cover those areas. And then I'm going to take my dedicated counterfire artillery unit, whether that's a battery or a battalion or heck, even a brigade. And I'm going to lay those weapons on an azimuth of fire that's in that general vicinity. And what I want to wait for is I want to wait for the optimal time where I think the enemy artillery commander is going to commence all of his fire missions. And then that's when I'm going to trip on my radars, right? Because we don't just radiate 24/7. That's a guaranteer of failure and a lot of dead radar crews very quickly. And I'm going to flip those radars on, and then I'm going to, with pinpoint accuracy, because the radars are highly accurate systems, I'm then going to call down on my counterfire unit, and I'm going to smash them with overwhelming counterfire, right? And so that's the idea, right? That's how we suppress enemy IDF systems, and that's kind of how we win the counterfire fight. But the concept of target acquisition applies across the entire gamut of the targeting enterprise, right? So this is where we have our fundamental disconnect, our fundamental conundrum, because from the intelligence warfighting function perspective, target acquisition is something, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert in this field. It's just you guys don't learn about target acquisition, right? Like, we don't consciously teach it. We don't expose you to the concept of the target acquisition process and what it is. So yeah, so that's what I'm hoping we can kind of dig through today and kind of present some facts and get some knowledge out there to the force.
I would say, in answer to your statement of we were not taught target acquisition, we were, and then it was no longer really called out. Here's what I mean. I love the term RISTA, reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. When I came in as a 96 Bravo, that's what was taught. ISR, ISTAR, information collection, that was not in the vocabulary. And we were taught RISTA because obviously we're trying to do target acquisition on something, to put a warhead on a tank, to put a warhead on an air defense asset, on a battle position. That all went away when we went to GWAT, because target acquisition, I don't know. I'm going to just say it wasn't a term that resonated really well with all the HVI hunters. You're like, we have
Right.
already acquired the target in their minds, right? You know who Johnny Jihad is, you know who Abu Bad Guy is. We're going to go in there. We're going to make sure we're on time, on target for whatever operation we're doing against them and move on. So target acquisition went away because it became more about ISR saturation, determining, collateral damage estimates for, is it right to send in an ODA at this time? Is it good for a cordon at this time? So we were always taught target acquisition, but it shifted in how we spoke about it to 35 Foxes and trained on it for counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. And it got buried in all of the ISR information collection, education, and POIs we got. And it wasn't called out as you're specifically trying to do a sensor weapons pairing to defeat a bespoke enemy system.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And if I had to point my finger at a single culprit of kind of what happened there to describe what you've articulately laid out. I would say PID became the substitute for target acquisition, right? And the issue is that even in GWAT, in HVI targeting, whether you're using, and again, I kind of point the finger at SOF a little bit of this, because they came in and they said, hey, we don't really think that the traditional targeting methodology works, blah, 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 blah. And again, I would counter back to anybody who wants to make that argument. I would say, no, you guys just didn't know how to do it the right way. What I would say is, when they went to the F3 EAD model, right, specifically for HVI targeting, they were definitely more focused on functionally characterizing their targets, right? Because they had to do it based on activity versus just, this is what it is, right? So 3 guys walking around aren't a target, but 3 guys digging a hole in the road and look like they're putting something in it. Now they are, right? So that's behavioral based functional characterization of the target. But target acquisition never changed, even in GWAT, because, and again, this I believe is the doctrinal disconnect, right? So if you go into ATP 309.12, which is the only place you'll find target acquisition explained, to an extent that it's something you can integrate into your targeting concepts, characterizes it as an element of the fire support system, right? And this is my huge issue with targeting doctrine writ large at Fort Sill and the .D writers there, is because they lump targeting as a concept as a fire support system, okay? And it is not, right? So and it doesn't work, right? There's an inherent contradiction there, because if you're going to say, hey, listen, the Army's targeting methodology supports the Joint Forces targeting methodology. Okay, well, the Joint Force doesn't define targeting as fire support. It doesn't define it as a fire support system. It's a separate, standalone, distinct process, right? That a unit or organization executes. Okay, so the Army's number one mistake, the field artillery right there, is that, as they were saying, okay, well, it's part of a fire support system. It's like, actually, no, it's not, right? It's separate and distinct as part of targeting. But it says very specifically in the manual that target acquisition is the detection, identification, and location of a target. But here's the caveat: you have to read the entire sentence. In sufficient detail to permit effective employment of capabilities that create the required effects. So even when you were out there knocking down HVIs, okay, you can say, well, we knew who they were, okay, but you didn't know where they were, right? So we expended a lot of collection assets saying, okay, where is objective, Hammer, Abu Saeed, where is he at in this particular time? Because I've got a focused targeting force, or I've got a SOTF team, or I've got some other operator out there that's going to go out there and either zap this dude, or do a capture, or try to do something, right? Well, that's the effect. Okay, so but everybody got so focused on the PID aspect of it that the target acquisition aspect of it is, okay, well, we think this guy's, or whoever this target's going to be at this particular location tonight. Let's send up a reconnaissance asset up there to actually acquire whatever it is that we're going to geolocate this person at, and then let's launch our whatever our targeting force, or our capture kill team, whatever we wanted to call it, and do it in a time that we know that target is going to be in that location, right? Well, that's target acquisition, right? And again, it just, the whole concept of doing it kind of got lost, like you alluded to, with all the checklists and and all of our, we had so much ISR out there, we kind of had to separate the wheat from the chaff. We didn't really know how to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I would say that PID is probably where we went wrong. But as you like to point out, effectively throughout all of your episodes, what's old again is new again, and here we are, and we have to methodically apply precepts of target acquisition to the modern battlefield.
I absolutely agree with PID. And when we went into the JSOC borrowed from the Air Force, the F3 EAD model, to find those rapidly emerging targets, that mentality shift, along with what you just said, we had air supremacy. We had ISR supremacy. There was no contention. Right. We owned the timing and tempo of a lot of things. Right. And we got used to ubiquitous RISTA, ISR, ISTAR, whatever we want to call it. So you could just park all of this ISR out there, and you could just continuously call for more to come into country. and just soaking in all of this ISR and having this surveillance apparatus for all of your targets, we lost sight of the need to delineate these are assets going after targets, and these are assets building our understanding of the battlefield. And that used to be the thing where we had, here's your information collection. We're just going to call it ISR. Your ISR for indications and warnings, your ISR for current intelligence, your ISR for general military intelligence, your ISR for target intelligence. We lost sight of the fact that you only have so many assets to do so many things, and you need to align certain assets to get after your targets, which I think is really where we're trying to go in this conversation, is the remembrance of you don't have infinite assets. Not all of your assets have infinite sensors. Not all of your sensors are tuned to every single thing that emerges on the battlefield. So unless you align your assets to go after your designated high payoff targets and high value targets, you're going to lose the ability to strike them at your time and tempo, which is the whole purpose of offensive operations.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's a good segue to kind of get into, okay, so we're in FM20, right? I mean, this is your guys's, capstone document here, and trying to understand where this fits in, right? So when you look at 2.0 and you get on page 1-10, right, and it talks about in the big gray box there, intelligence requirements. Okay, it's got, it lists them out. Okay, number one, number two, this is what it is. But there's a sentence there that's really important where it says intelligence requirements primarily comprise priority intelligence requirements, right? The holy PIRs, right? That thou shalt not violate. Again, got to read the whole sentence, and it continues, but may also include targeting intelligence requirements and other intelligence requirements, right? And then it bulletizes PARs, targeting intelligence requirements and other intelligence requirements, right? And so this when I looked at this, I said, wait a minute, this is a fundamental change from the old 2.0 where it unequivocally stated, hey, high payoff targets were part of the PIRs, right? And maybe this is in the IPB manual where it goes into the PIRs a little bit more. No, it's not. Okay, I see you shaking your head. Okay, well, there you go. Again, we have a classic disconnect between what Fort Huachuca says is the right way versus what Fort Sill says is the right way, right? And but you go into the second bullet, it talks about targeting intelligence requirements where it says targeting intelligence requirements refer to those high payoff target related requirements outside of what is already captured in PIR. So it's like, wait a minute, that sentence doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if you're saying that we have a separate thing now outside of the PIR called targeting intelligence requirements, but you said that those are, to the way I read it, is furthermore, in addition to, right? Then high payoff targets, where and when they are, should also be in the PIRs, because it says outside of what was already captured in PIR, right? That the commander specifies as part of the information collection effort, right? So to me, there it is, right? Like that's the entire impetus for taking this whole process seriously and adding some more intellectual rigor to it, for these collection managers, these senior intelligence officers, these targeting officers, and FIST courts. That's got to get right, because if we're not putting the high payoff targets in with the PARs, then where, perfect example of this audience, right? You're a young 35 Fox, you're reading these PIRs. These are your overarching guidelines of what you are doing as an analyst. These are the things that are important to you. So if you're not seeing the high payoff targets as part of that guidance, then why would you be doing any kind of target acquisition or focusing on analyzing any data that is for the purposes of target acquisition, right? It doesn't make any sense. And so this is, again, it just goes to a larger problem of that, again, we're sitting here talking about it, so we're trying to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, where we don't really have good intelligence warfighting function and fires warfighting function integration, and more importantly, training integration at the units of, hey, how do we do this thing called targeting? How do we do this thing called intelligence support to targeting? And then all of its subset components.
So what I would propose is, if we just bundle everything together, what we agree on so far is that target acquisition never left the ISR doctrine and never left targeting doctrine. It just got buried under different terms. and it got viewed at with a different lens when we were doing counterinsurgency, counterterrorism. It was there. It was called PID, find and fix under the F3 EAD model. And that allowed us to kind of drift as at least an intel warfighting function away from being focused on, oh, there's a difference between situational awareness and situational understanding and target intelligence. We merged them together based on what we were in. And so
That's
now
right.
what we're also encountering as we moved out of coin and GWAT, et cetera, is two cultures. The culture that says, I want to understand everything. And as I understand everything, I will automatically be able to select things out of that understanding for targeting, right? I just have infinite red diamonds on the map, and I'm just able to right click on the diamond and say fire mission. I'm going to have such good ISR that my situational awareness will allow me to target. And then you have the, I would say, older generations of the us who understood, no, there's ISR that's built and very good at helping you understand what the enemy courses of actions are, how the enemy is organizing their tactics and strategy. And then you have ISR that allows you to engage those high payoff targets. And you need to clearly call these things out in your PIRs and your SORs, specified requirements for collection when they go out. And I'll give an example. There's a lot of intel people, when I came through the schoolhouse, we do a lot of implied dialogue in our doctrine because we think everyone's just uber smart. So you say, hey, I'm going to
That's
issue
a
out.
bad assumption.
That's a bad. Fires is
Oh
more
yeah,
explicit.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's wearing 2 stars. He's got to be a smart guy, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, no. So, for example, when we give out indications and warnings, we'll write out in our EEIs, hey, when you see an armor company pass this NAI, it indicates COA 1 or COA 2. Well, okay, timeout. Who
Right.
is
Right.
that? Who's that INW going to? Oh, it's going to the Cav squadron and the 18-year-old sitting on the talk on the ops floor. You're like, okay, two problems here. What is the size of an armor
Yep.
company? You're assuming everybody knows the size of an enemy armor
Right.
company.
That's
Other
right.
problem. Does everybody know the difference between armor and tank? Because there's
Yeah.
a subtle
Right.
difference. Subtle
Yep.
difference.
Yep. Mechanized infantry carriers are also armor.
Yeah. But in your mind, you were saying tank. Okay, well, wait a minute. Now you have confusion that starts to permeate. Did it matter to you
That's
if
right.
it was a T-55 tank company or if it was a T-72
Right.
tank company? Those details. So instead of saying armor company, you need to say when you see 6 or more T-72s, report this. That
Right.
specificity, it's expected that everyone just understands that in Intel doctrine. So all of this exists, as you were saying, in the IPB manual. It's just not explicitly called out. And it's
Yeah.
left us in this mode of people have been taught over time. PIRs are the following. What enemy IADS asset will prevent us from doing the wet gap crossing? Okay, well, intrinsically, the high payoff targets must be in there, right? So we know we need to orient ISR to go find the IADS as the MI thought process. It's in there. But for everyone who doesn't understand what air defense is, what composes air defense, and what we're trying to get after, again, Intel just said find the armor company without specifying what is armor and what types of tanks. And that's, I think, where you're trying to call forward is as we go back to what is old is new again, we need to remember in the heat of battle, when there's a lot of things going on, you don't have ISR supremacy everywhere, assets are in short supply, you're going to need to say this ISR is designated against this target type to do targeting against this thing. All of your other ISR can go over here trying to figure out your general military situation, but we need to be clear to ourselves and our subordinates and our higher headquarters, these assets are going after this set of equipment and these formations, which are critical to us winning the battle. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm just going to kind of go at your points one at a time because you highlighted as I was listening to you, you highlighted about 2, maybe 3 different concrete, kind of concrete things, right? So first and foremost, talking about, you know, persistent ISR, right, or persistent collection, right? And again, I go back to the 3.912 I'm looking at right now, where, and again, you guys don't see this, right, and you don't know, so, but it's right here, black and white, where it says target acquisition requirements often comprise a large portion of the overall information collection effort, especially, and this goes back to our previous episode, when conducting deep operations or employing sophisticated cross-domain operations, right? So that right there should be kind of a principle, right? So target acquisition, if we're thinking of it in terms of a step action drill, right, or a battle drill, like this is how I do target acquisition. Step one, get my list of ISR assets. Step two, get my NAIs and TAIs. That's not what this is, right? Target acquisition, it has to be looked at as principles of overarching. This is what should be at the forefront of your mind as you're going through targeting operations, right? And you're focused on that find and fix kind of aspects of the F2T2EA, right? Secondly, in your example of, hey, we're going to do the wet gap crossing, we need to be identifying, what those things, those targets are out there that are going to help the enemy commander stop us, the friendly force, from doing the wet gap crossing. Well, those are the HVTs, okay? Those are the high value targets, okay? And they're important, right? And again, and this is just prevalent on the fire side, right? Like, our people for some reason think that if it doesn't have HVT in front of it, then we shouldn't be focusing our time on it, right? And that's absolutely ridiculous. There's an order of precedent there, right? And that's laid out very clearly in FM 360. You have time sensitive targets, and below that you have component critical targets. Below that you have high payoff targets. Below that you have high value targets, right? And then under that, what's left? Just targets, right? And then obviously the least desirable target category that you'd want to waste resources and time engaging on are suspect targets, right? Because they're, for exactly that reason, you actually have to devote more assets and resources to functionally characterize those suspect targets, right? And then locate them and take space and time. So understanding that in that example, those are the high value targets, and those are absolutely important to be identified because they're important to the enemy commander. But the reason why, as you said before, I don't want an intelligence analyst with a button that can say create fire mission is because while it may be important to the enemy commander, it may not be important to us. We may not care. It may have no bearing on the operational context. Yes, the enemy commander has all these assets, but if my mission is to get across the river, right, and do the wet gap crossing, he may have an asset that doesn't impact my ability to do that. And while it's important to them for other reasons, okay, it's not important to me in that time and place to do the wet gap crossing. That difference, that operational contextual difference, is the high payoff targets, right? And so there's a reason why we don't want the intelligence analysts designating the high payoff targets, right? We want the operations people doing that because of the operational context. And that's, I'm not going to sit here and pound my fist on the table like many of my former peers would and be like, oh, that's why we have targeting warrant officer, intel nerd. How dare thee? How dare you? Absolutely ignorant, approach. To your last point, which, okay, if the whole purpose of this thing is to identify the high payoff targets that we need to facilitate the operation, then we need to have resources that are specifically designated and allocated and given a mission of target acquisition, because everything translates down to a tactical task to the operator of an asset or a resource, right? Even if it's down to your example of the Cav squadron, maybe it's a dismounted Cav squadron that was operating far and deep and unafraid. That's a task to that recon troop, right? And so target acquisition has to be seen for ISR tasks as a mission, as a specific task, not just this is something that they're doing as an aside, right? Like this is bonus, right? Like how, again, like you pointed out in GWAT, we had persistent ISR, and we could tap into things that were actively acquiring targets out there in near real time, but we didn't have to prioritize that effort, right? Which is again, a really great point. So today, if you're a collection manager, you have to prioritize what resources you have, and you have to break that out, right? And again, it segues into the next topic in this area, which is understanding the purpose of a target area of interest in a named area of interest. And how are they mutually supporting, but where are there differences, right? So yeah, that's kind of what I think about all that. Not to tell you you're wrong, because you weren't completely wrong, but you weren't completely right either, and that's okay.
So can you, before we go through the NAI TAI in a vignette, if you will,
Vignetti.
vignettes, but before that, suspect target. I had wanted to throw the BS
Yeah,
flag on you because in previous podcasts
I
you've done, you're like,
know.
suspect target. I said, that doesn't exist and it just sounds dumb
It
to me. And then
absolutely
you
does.
schooled me. Do you need a moment to
Yeah.
bring that up?
Yeah, I'm doing a control F on this too. Okay, so again, funny, right? Because guess where that lives? Same manual, ATP 309.12, right? And again, I absolutely blame Fort Sill. I absolutely blame .D for not putting that in the FM 360 when it was rewritten about 2 years ago. Is like, what is a suspect target, and why is it not a mainstream terminology, right? A suspect target is simply a target that does not pass target selection standards, right? Well, okay, well, we could say target selection standards all day long. That's an advanced concept that has multiple concrete concepts in it. So if you don't understand what target selection standards actually are and what they mean, then the idea of a suspect target is going to be completely, it's not going to make sense, right? It's going to be nonsense to you. So what's important to understand is that as we are collecting, right, as we are gaining a better picture of the enemy disposition, right, through the SIP, right, and you say, as you say, there's a map full of red diamonds out there. All right, you could essentially say, look, all of those red diamonds. Oh, and now I remember what I wanted to talk correct on the wet gap example was we don't target by individual equipment types. And I know that's a controversial statement, okay, because my peers, they'll sit there and they'll say all day long, and they'll be like, no, 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 we target, we target individual, equipment and entities and facilities and things like that. And I would be like, actually, no, we don't. Okay, we target at the tactical level, especially, our corps and divisions, right down to our brigades. We're targeting enemy organizations that have and are defined through their function by those types of equipment. So, like you pointed out, right, a battalion size formation that has a majority of T-72 tanks is in fact a tank battalion. Tank battalion is a functional characterization, right? Okay, so we're targeting that unit, right? Because that's what you guys are looking at on the battlefield. You're looking at units, okay, that you intrinsically understand are functionally characterized by the majority of the equipment, right? So if I have a tank battalion, but it's got more infantry fighting vehicles than it does tanks, then Garrett, it ain't a tank battalion, right? I mean, it changes what it is, right? If all of a sudden they got, all of a sudden a Chinese bicycle, platoon came in there and that's all they had was bicycles, well, then they'd be a bicycle platoon, right? I mean, that's kind of common sense, right? Let's two things can be true at the same time, right? Like as I'm so fond of saying. Okay, so your map's filled with all these red diamonds out there that we're looking at and we're getting fidelity on. Okay, they are, in all of those red diamonds are out there, are in effect suspect targets. Okay, for a whole host of reasons. One, we haven't designated an effect against them. Okay, and when we say we're designating an effect, what we're really saying is that for whatever reason, okay, it is important that we attack that. Okay, this is a very difficult concept for our maneuver folks to get, right? Our infantry guys, our armor guys and gals, okay, even our aviators, okay, because they think they are so heavily focused in terms of terrain. Okay, I'm going to this hill, I'm going to seize it and secure it. It never even enters their thought process that, well, there's an enemy thing there, okay, there's an enemy unit there, okay, and I have to do something. Like, in their mind, it's going to be like, well, I'm going to go to the hill and there's enemy there. I'm going to have a direct fire engagement. That's all there is to it. Okay, well, that's great if you're a company commander. Okay, you're a rifle company commander. That's good. All right, I get it. You don't have time to think any deeper than that. It's not like they give you an S2. I mean, we tried this with COIS teams, right, back in the day, and look how well that worked out. But they just don't have the bandwidth at that level of leadership to be able to provide, to be able to apply that level of analysis, right? So then, at the battalion level, okay, that's kind of where we have to really start thinking that, right? Like, you get an S2, put that person to work, okay? analyze the red diamonds out there. Don't just think in terms of go here, do this, right? Like the knuckle jugger, like, oh, climb big hill, shoot enemy in face. Rawr. I mean, I get it, right? I've lived it, right? I understand that mentality. But that's how people get zapped, right? That's how you end up losing a platoon, a company, a battalion, right? On the objective because you didn't do that rigor to attrit forces favorable for a direct fire engagement. So anyways, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Suspect targets, okay, have to be vetted and validated. All right. And so when we say they have to be able to pass the target selection standards, it's because the target selection standards designate a target category, i.e., the enemy unit, right, with the equipment that functionally characterizes it. And then but what people fail to realize is it also applies a size component to it, right? Or what we call a strength rating or a quantity rating when you're using a FATAS as the weaponeer, okay? So like it's not, if you have target selection standards or a high payoff target list out there, I tell intelligence analysts all the time when I lecture and I say, if you get a targeting officer or a fire supporter and they come to you and say, here's my high payoff target list, and it says number 1, T-72, number 2, SA-21, number 3, run away. Run away. Don't even waste your time talking to them because you're just going to feel stupid, more stupid after the conversation. Okay. That is not the level of rigor that needs to be applied to that analysis. Okay. It needs to be a named unit. It needs to be the equipment that makes up the named unit, and it needs to be the size of what you want to engage. Okay. What you want to apply resources to engage. So for example, let's use our tank battalion example that we like to use. Okay. Like, it's highly unlikely, depending on my environment, that I'm going to be able to engage this tank battalion en masse in one single engagement, right? Like, where am I going to find 60 tanks just hanging out there, right? Well, maybe at NTC, right? The logger site, okay? And so that's possible. But let's assume a more realistic scenario, right? Like a movement to contact, okay? And these guys are spread out. This tank battalion is spread out. They're in fighting positions, whatever. They're in the defensive. So you have to say, okay, look, if I find a platoon of tanks at one time, that's worthy of the engagement. Okay. If I find a platoon of tanks, that's worthy of an engagement. Okay. And we then qualify that into a strength rating. Okay, well, that's 6 tanks, that's 4 tanks, that's 2 tanks, etc. Now, sometimes we get up into the strategic level and we say, well, that target, a single TEL launcher is a time sensitive target. So we will go after the single TEL launcher, right? But again, that's all scaled and scoped appropriately. Well, that information goes on the target selection standards. And then there's the timeliness and the accuracy component, which applies to the ballistic impact calculations and the time of engagement. Okay. So you've got to wrap all those together. Now, if a target falls into that, okay, a suspect target falls into that, then it's categorized. Okay. It's either an HVT, or as you scale up, a CCT or a TST, right? Because it meets that criteria. If it doesn't meet that criteria, it is suspect. Okay. Now that doesn't mean people are like, well, it's suspect, so I just, I ignore it. No, it doesn't mean you ignore it. It means you have to make a conscious, deliberative effort to go out there and confirm or deny exactly what that suspect target is. Okay. So if you go out there and you say, well, it's not anything that's important, then okay, but at least it's not suspect anymore. Now it's just a target. Okay. And just because it's a target doesn't mean you have to attack it. Right. And so that's really what it comes down to. But yeah, the definition of it is in the 3912. It talks specifically about in AFATATS, how AFATATS classifies suspect targets, suspect target processing. I'm trying to find the exact language here for you. Okay, in its most complex form, it is the collation of target indicators and suspect targets from diverse sources into a target identification and location accurate enough to justify attack, right? That's in terms of what we call target processing, okay? So that's kind of where its suspect targets falls into play, and I super wish that they had put that in the 360, which was supposed to go in the automations appendix, which amazingly never got written after I retired. So go figure. That's a lot to unpack, by the way.
Yeah. So I think 1, we're going to have to go through that in a number of episodes, but 2, a vignette, if you will, because we've been talking.
Vignette.
Yeah, us two, we understand our shorthand abstract with each other. But
right.
For anyone listening who's like, okay, what the hell did all of this mean and how do I apply it? Let's go to IPB. Step one and two in terms of terrain is very simple. If you don't know, when Jesse and I are talking about a wet gap, that's crossing a river. Or if you're really ignorant, you feel like
because it's got
crossing a
water
lake.
and it's wet.
Yeah. Or
Yeah,
we're going to
because
cross this lake.
because it's water and it's wet.
Yeah. And it's a
Well,
gap
isn't
between
that like a
land.
marine thing?
I don't know.
Don't the Marines do that? I don't know. Like,
I
hey,
don't
I'm gonna go. I guess it'd have to be a big lake. Like, I'm gonna wet gap Lake Ontario, and invade Canada and make them the 51st state. I mean, isn't that? I don't know, to me, that just sounds literal. I'm
Yeah.
gonna use literal. I'm gonna use a big word. Oh, that's literal. It's like a marine thing. I don't know. I don't know. But go ahead.
Why can't we just say river crossing? I don't know. Anyway, so when you're
I don't know.
crossing a river where the civilian bridges have all been blown up, so you're going to have to bring out your engineers and do all this stuff while you're getting shot at. That's a wet gap crossing. So you determine, okay, here's where we're going to cross. Now, obviously, if you can figure out this is a good place to send tanks and infantry and everyone across, the enemy has likely figured out that you're probably going to cross there. There's not a lot of places to cross big moving rivers when you really get down
read
to
a
it.
Read a World War II book about the Allies movements through France and the Low Countries in Germany, right? Like how many wet gap crossings those? I mean, they were doing like 5 a day or something crazy like that, right? And the Germans blew up every bridge between that and Berlin, right? Because go figure, crossing across a body of water under fire is incredibly difficult.
Yep.
So for the attacker.
Oh yeah. So that's wet gap and that's the terrain. We've identified, let's say we're at a division and you go, okay, in order for U.S. forces to succeed, we have to look at what the enemy needs from the S2 side or G2 side, because we're at a division, in order to prevent U.S. forces or allied forces from making this bridgehead on the other side. Analysts go through everything, and almost every single time it's adversary indirect fire capabilities, because they can shoot cluster munitions and blow up the bridges and etc., make things a bad day, along with air defense, because that shoots down our airborne ISR that goes after our CAS, our air support, or close combat aviation, aka Apaches.
Close combat attack, nerd.
Yeah, nerds.
CCA, close combat attack.
Air weapons team.
This is why Intel folks shouldn't talk operations. I forgive you, Garrett. Go.
Well, that's why we do it, so we can all feel enriched together. Yeah, smarter together.
That's right. It's a journey. It's a learning journey.
Okay, so we need to go. The enemy high value target in this case is, air defense and artillery. Great, and then you start working down. Okay, what's the equipment necessary for that? We're going to go with target engagement radars, target acquisition radars. I can't talk anymore.
It's like an NCO word. Target acquisition radar.
Euphrates.
You acquisite.
River.
Go orientate. You go orientate yourself to the Euphrates and acquisite some stuff. That's a good NCO word.
I ruined myself with Vignetti. I cursed myself. Where were we at?
Know, right?
Counterfire radar.
We were classifying high value. Yeah, we were classifying high value targets.
High value targets. If you do the date scenario, it's always the 1L220 counterfire radar.
IL220. Yeah.
We
love the IL220.
And you go, okay, and you pass that on to the fires guy. But before we do that, the collection managers or information collection managers are going to sit down. And here's where we're going to get into general military surveillance, situational awareness, ISR, and target acquisition. So this is where this splits. Okay. The first thing to understand, because we said radars, and some radars, there's a couple tubes and launchers in there. But if you're not an EW nerd, and someone will correct us all when we get down the road, here's the first thing to remember. When you're driving in your car and you're not connected to the satellite, right? If you just use the antenna on your car to tune into AM, FM radio, surprise, you can't get DirecTV, you can't get Amazon Prime, right? The TV signal doesn't come through your AM, FM antenna. You're like, what? Right. Also, you don't get satellite radio through your AM, FM antenna, and that's part of that whole. Things operate at different frequencies, different rates, different.
Well, this is where if I was a 4-star, I'd be sitting there saying, why can't it just be as easy as my iPhone, Chief? I mean, come on.
One antenna.
I should be able to do that. It's an antenna, right? Why can't I get Amazon Prime? I got a package I need delivered. Mama needs new shoes tomorrow. 2-day delivery, Anyways. Yeah.
Different antennas go after different things, and this is going to matter greatly for understanding the importance of target acquisition. Your high frequency ultra high frequency, super high frequency, et cetera, et cetera. You got KA,
Oh
KU,
God, you're
X
hurting my
band.
brain.
I know all of
You're
these
killing
things.
me, bro.
This is why this matters. You have so many radio signals to go through. You can put every antenna known to mankind on your ISR platform, and it's only going to fly for a really short period of time, or it's going to be a really big truck with a lot of antennas flapping around saying, shoot me here. That's option one. Or you're going to need to select what antenna goes on what surveillance and reconnaissance platform, and you're only going to have
Mission payloads? What?
mission payloads.
Mission
You're only
payloads?
going to have so many antennas up at any one time looking for certain signals. So if the counterfire radar is operating in S band and the air defense radar is operating in KA band, I just made those up. You can like pillar me later for getting the bands wrong.
The beating shall
The,
commence
the
by
beatings
the
will
EW
commence. I
community.
know EW and Signers will just fillet me. But again, they're so different. Now you have to select, okay, this ISR platform needs to be going over here, looking at this named area of interest or the multiples of them, where we suspect as the intel community that they're going to be at. And this ISR platform needs to go with this antenna over here to look for air defense radar. We now have multiple NAIs for different pieces of equipment, for different functional categorizations of targets with different payloads to acquire those targets and then get a fix sufficient enough where we meet target selection standards and attack guidance matrix. Now, all of the other ISR that the collection manager is going to put out is looking at things like enemy radio to radio communications for command posts. It's going to be looking for, hey, where are the command posts? Where are the tubes for the artillery? Where are the battle positions at? Where are the anti-tank ditches, obstacle reconnaissance? Right. So now I'm chunking out my ISR with different mission payloads to look at different things in time and space based on the NAIs to give me an understanding of the situation on one hand, and to enable the fires community to go after high value targets on the other hand. We hand that all over to the fires and ops community. And at this point, I think this is your lane to comment on what you're going to do as you take that in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so it's kind of like what I said before, and I don't want to make it overly complicated, even though for that scenario, it would be complicated, right? That would be that would take some serious intellectual rigor to dissect all of that and break it all out because, your average field artilleryman isn't going to know too much about spectrum management, spectrum identification. He or she's just going to look on a map and go, it's there and point their big fat finger on it, right? So obviously you got to bring in the EW folks in, right? Because they have to build essentially a attack guidance matrix that encapsulates the spectrum as a domain, right? So that's a completely separate and distinct process that we could probably have a whole nother episode on, hopefully bringing in a smart EW person that kind of articulate that better. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take all those HVTs and we're going to operationalize which ones will stop us from doing the mission, right? So like you pointed out, maybe it is the IL-220 radar, or maybe, you know what, maybe we don't care about that, right? Maybe instead of focusing and worrying about all of these specialized capability, all these enabling capabilities, maybe it just comes down to, man, we just need to attrit these folks down to a number that we can then, use something like, COFM, right? Correlation of forces and means, right? Where we can sit there and go, okay, we can now defeat, the enemy here with direct fire engagements because the terms are now favorable, right? Like it's now to our advantage, right? We can now win in a direct fire engagement. So maybe the high payoff targets are simply the mass amounts of enemy direct fire systems, right? Tanks, helicopters, whatever, right? And so I think that's something that gets overlooked quite a bit, right? We have a tendency to focus, especially artillery guys, right? There's a huge prejudice, huge bias to look at and go and really mirror imaging, right? Is what the IC calls it, right? And we mirror image the hell out of a high payoff target list, let me tell you. And we'll be like, IL-220 radar, because if I'd go after the Q-53. Like, well, congratulations, you're definitely, you've passed you've passed Joe Feck, Joint Operations Fires Effect course. You clearly have thought this through, guy. But the whole point is you have to apply targeting principles to this, okay, which are codified in the 360, okay? And one of the principles that is really in my mind, the first order principle is be efficient, Okay. Only attack the targets you need to attack with the least amount of force you need. Why? To achieve the effect. Okay. And so it is just so incumbent to sit there and say, look, if I want to neutralize, suppress, destroy, harass, interdict, limit, attrit, whatever that effect is to that particular target, it's because that's the least amount of resources I need to expend. Okay. In order to achieve our mission and objective as the friendly force. Okay. That's the overriding first principle. And so you apply that thinking or that principle to all of these HVTs out there. All right. And the products that you've mentioned, like the attack guidance matrix, the target selection standards, really the targeting synchronization matrix, should capture that first order principle very well. You should, if you're keeping that first order principle in mind, as you look at it, all of that should flow logically and rationally, right? It should make complete sense. So those are your high payoff targets that you're going to attack. Now that's all part of, if you're going to look at D3A, that's all part of decide, right? And so everybody's like, oh, so, decide, blah 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 blah. Which one's more important? That's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Okay, they're all important. All right. Decide takes a lot of intellectual rigor. Okay, that is where you have to apply a lot of deductive reasoning. You have to apply a lot of analytical brain power to it. Okay, because if you can get that right, then the rest of it actually flows, in my opinion, fairly easy. All right, because you have to know what you want to attack. And so units that struggle with this, okay, at all, and we just suck at targeting, blah 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 blah. Well, okay, that's probably true. All right, but you suck at targeting because ultimately you, the commander, don't know what the hell you want to do. All right, and this is just my biggest, this is, for me, this is just like the cross that I bear on my back, right? Is like, if I'm in a unit, or if I was serving as a targeting officer in a unit, man, I always had a commander that didn't know what the hell they wanted, right? At any level. Didn't matter if it was brigade, division, corps, whatever. It's like they don't know what they want, right? It's like, well, I got to tell you, but you should know, commander, how you see the battle unfolding, okay? Like, you define mission success for your organization. Sure, yeah, you get mission statement and end state and stuff like that from the boss, but really you're given wide latitude to interpret mission success. So if you don't know what that looks like, how the heck are we as fires and intel folks supposed to provide you a targeting plan, right? Or a targeting, effort that's going to say, attack this target at this time, at this place with these resources. Okay. I mean, because you don't know what you want, right? So if I got to tell you that, then who's the commander? So I think that's a thing that, staffs, especially in their infinite effort to please the boss, kind of let the boss off the hook sometimes. But yeah, but that's the process, right? Is like, okay, you did all the HVT work. Thank you. We got to select the HVTs, and then the important process of what we were talking about here in the episode: target acquisition, finding and fixing. Okay, that is just a simple math problem, right? That is prioritization. And then ultimately, what I need from the collection manager folks out there is, you really need to know what the asset can do, right? You need to know what the capability can do. So if I'm having a conversation with a young captain or a young major or a senior NCO that's working collection, and I say, listen, you're putting up this asset, or you got this ground surveillance radar out there. Ooh, ground surveillance radar. That's making a comeback, by the way. And you've got these sensors, these ground sensors out there, or aerial sensors out there. Can you tell me what the target location error is? Can you tell me the timeliness of the reports you've been getting from these resources? Is it persistent? Do you get consistent updates? Or is this something like it checks in every hour and gives you a report dump? Because that's a real thing now too, right? Right, Garrett? Like, we don't want surveillance teams out there just constantly broadcasting, right? So maybe there's a plan in place for that. It's no different than how we approach the radars, right? We don't just turn the radars on and radiate 24/7. That's a recipe for dead radar crews and blown up radars all over the battlefield. So I need to know those things. And so if the collection manager doesn't know those things, if they're uninformed, if they're ignorant of those capabilities, I can't do the target selection standards. And then we're back to our original problem of, what's a suspect target versus what's a HVT or an HVT.
Yeah, you need to know in this conversation with the collection manager, and this is why target acquisition really, in my opinion, as well, needs to come back. RISTA is preferred to me over ISR as we go to great power
Right.
competition and everything.
Right.
Reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. Hey, in the fires meeting, the intel guy comes, as you said, and goes, look, we have, let's just make up a number, 10 assets that are able to identify where the radars are, right? So detect, initiate, identify, correlate, and maintain. We can detect the radars with these assets. We can initiate a track and identify friend, foe, and radar type with 10 assets. You're like, great, but can 10 assets, is that 24-hour surveillance, or are we
Right.
only able to do it in bits and chunks? Is that the entire bridgehead area, or is that limited in certain segments of the battlefield? And this is where the conversation goes from NAI to TAI. When are
Right.
we going to have the right assets with the right fidelity to identify, correlate, and maintain custody of that target during the attack? How long do I have, and what is the fidelity? If I don't have it, then we end up in this perpetual suspect target motion where we're like, well, we just confirm or deny until I'm able to shoot. So if you as a collection manager are not thinking minimum threshold of fidelity of your ISR platform, we're never going to be able to shoot the mission if you don't have that thought of, okay, I need to make that minimum fidelity, I need to deliver it, this is when I can deliver it, and now we can start boxing NAI to TAI. But what's the overlink between NAI and TAI that you alluded to earlier?
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Like NAIs and TAIs, the problem is again, man, if somebody, I don't know, if somebody would just create a course called tactical targeting, and we would make it a requirement for not just field artillerymen or fire supporters, but we'd also put our intel analysts in there, boy, we could solve a lot of problems with this not understanding the difference between an NAI and a TAI, right? So when you look and what I really like about, again, 3912 is that it pulls all of its definitions from the joint pubs, right? So it pulls its definitions of NAI and TAI from joint pub 201.3, right? Which I think is a pretty good joint pub. So you guys are all familiar with an NAI. I don't need to read that verbatim, that's for sure. But here's the thing, okay? A TAI is the geographical area where high value targets can be acquired and engaged by friendly forces. Okay. Verbatim. Now here's the problem. Okay. It says high value targets, not high payoff targets. So for some people in their minds, that means, oh, I'm Intel. I own high value. That means I make them. No, kind of, sort of. You get a vote. There's no doubt about it. It's a collaborative process. What's not captured in that sentence is the fact that a high payoff target is a high value target. You see what I'm saying? Um, and yes, you also build TAIs for things other than high payoff targets. Okay, you build them for HVTs and TSTs and CCTs. Okay, you just don't build them for suspect targets. Why don't we build them for suspect targets? Well, that's because that's what the NAI is for. Okay, and so it says, not all TAIs will form part of the friendly course of action. Well, that's because we account for HVTs, right? And so HVTs are not HTTs, and they're therefore not part of us achieving the friendly mission, right? So that's why that sentence makes sense. Okay. Only TAIs associated with high priority targets or are of interest to the commander. Okay. Okay. Well, how does that get captured? It gets captured on the commander's decision support template, because where and when to engage high payoff targets is a commander's decision. Okay. Always has been, always should be. Okay. These TAIs are identified by the targeting staff during wargaming and are recorded on both the targeting synchronization matrix and intelligence synchronization matrix, right? I wish we are in a world, or I hope, I'm gonna voluntary cognitive dissonance here, right? Like, I hope we live in a world where we finally understand as an army that if you're a collection manager, that you do know that TAIs go on your ISM, right? Like, let's just assume that's true. Okay, so if you're one of those people and you don't know that, you got bigger problems. Okay, but let's assume you understand it. Okay, the TAIs. Okay, and this is, I think, in the third paragraph here, where it's incredibly important, where it says NAIs are used both to confirm or deny an enemy COA and locate HPTs. Okay. And this is where I love when people say, well, it doesn't say this. Oh, it does say this. TAIs cannot exist outside of an NAI as they are both inextricably linked to the commander's priority information requirements and decision points. So there it is. That single run-on sentence, oh, actually, sorry, it's two sentences. Those two sentences right there are not in FM20. Please, like, help us help you, Fort Huachuca. You know, like, how can that not be in there, right? Like, somebody from .D in Fort Sill pick up the phone and call somebody in .D at Fort Huachuca and have a conversation. Hey, CWABs, you know, do you not know that your two books don't match? I mean, come on now. That right there is like, there should be no excuse for not doing this, right? There should be no excuse for not understanding this. So what's important to understand contextually about the TAIs are, these are boxes on the ground where we want to engage the targets because it's favorable to us. This is where, again, we apply the targeting principles. Okay, that TAI, like, we're not just drawing some random box in the middle of nowhere. That box should be in some place where, let's say, it's our tank battalion again. Okay, maybe that's where they're canalized, right? They're rolling through restricted terrain in a valley or something. Well, guess what? We can drop a whole bunch of ATACMs on that road and just have us a nice merry little time, highway of death kind of thing. The TAI should account for that. Okay, and the TAI should have a time of activation, a time of deactivation that matches appropriately when the ISR asset that is tasked with target acquisition. And again, please, let's not think one-dimensionally, something that flies. Okay, let's think ground too. And this is where the old school FIST cult teams were so gosh darn critical, right? And everybody,
Combat observation and lasing team, right?
team. Yeah, combat observation lasing team. They were essentially an FO team, forward observers, that were at the division level and the corps level, whose only job was to go out there and target acquire, okay, division and corps high payoff targets. And guess what? We said, we don't need those guys anymore. It's too risky putting them that far out in front of the forward line of troops, right? They're all going to get killed and everything like that. Well, lo and behold, SOTF guys do it for us all the time. Okay. Everybody said, oh, well, we'll replace that with all these great ISR assets. You mean the ones that are consistently getting shot out of the sky in Ukraine right now? What's the Ukrainian army doing? They're putting out essentially their version, scout teams. Well, guess what? That a scout team with a target acquisition device is a cult team, right? So that's the point. The point is you got to get those target acquisitions out there to be able to acquire the target on that TAI when we suspect that target, high payoff target, is going to be in that TAI. So again, the two things complement each other. That TAI complements the NAI. And if we have not accounted for that on the intelligence synchronization matrix, which does not match the targeting synchronization matrix, then again, you guys, you're doing it wrong, right? It's pretty simple, right? Like, you're doing it wrong. So you need to figure it out, because you're never going to have effective targeting. You're never going to be doing the F2T2A correctly.
Right. And then this transfers, in my mind, to the ops floor where you have the chief of operations, because we've done all this mental rigor. We need to really be on there. And what usually happens as soon as direct fire engagements occurs is everybody stops paying attention to whatever the sync matrix was, and you're just moving things.
Right.
Why do I bring it up? If you have general awareness ISR flying, Chops is going to scramble that stuff off of your NAIs and your ISR sync mat 9 times out of 10. They're like, move it over here, move it over here. We need to be adjustable to understand the fluid nature of battle. But you need to be clear, these ISR assets are aligned to target acquisition. If Chops moves these, we can no longer guarantee, feel good, whatever, appropriate effects at time as previously planned to make this battle successful.
Yeah, let me interject real quick. Not only that, what they're actually doing is they're violating the commander's decision support template. Because remember, the reason why the TAI is out there is because that's when we're going to engage a high payoff target, right? And again, I put the onus of this firmly on the fire cell, okay? The assistant FSO, okay, or the deputy FISCORD, okay, whose butt should be in that seat out there, or a very trusted, outspoken, assistant, fire support officer, okay, needs to go, whoa, 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 whoa. You Chops don't get to make that decision unless the commander has specifically delegated that to you, because you are deviating from the commander's decision support template. But what happens, right? Untrained, ill-trained, passive, not actively engaged in the deep fight, right? And so what occurs happens, as you describe it, all too frequently, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's
So
just
this
sad.
allows you to fence off on your ISR sync matrix. These assets are for understanding the battlefield, and you can move those around as necessary. But these assets are aligned, as you said, put the TAA on there so everybody knows you don't touch these unless we're going to say we're not going to engage targets in this box anymore. And now everyone understands, oh, this is latitude, this is no latitude. And you're like,
Right.
oh, target
Yeah,
acquisition is
and they have
critical
to
to
look
call
at,
out.
yeah, and what kills me too is they act like this is like some crazy idea, right? And I'm like, just go into any airspace operations center, go into any KOC, okay? Just sit in there for 20 minutes while they're doing an active scenario, okay? They do this all the time, okay? They treat collection assets, okay, just like anything else flying out there. And so if they need to dynamically re-roll, retask something for a dynamic target, okay, they have a process for that. It is not just willy-nilly, like, hey man, go move that bird. No, there is an entire step action drill process for this. There's deliberative thought as far as weighing risk, right? Again, risk to mission, risk to asset. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Okay, we're coming off of something that's deliberate and we're responding to something dynamic. Well, then that dynamic thing better be really, really, really important. Okay. And that requires a decision by somebody who's authorized to make that decision, right? But yeah, no, it's absolutely infuriating to see Army units, divisions, and corps staffs do this. And I get it, the chops is, whether it's a lieutenant colonel or a major, they're out there doing the best that they can. And they're also victims of their own experience, right? So if you're going to put an infantry captain out there, an infantry major out there, then they're going to think like they're still a company commander or a battalion commander, right? And they're like, move to the guns. That again, that's where you have to have engagement by FIST cords, by senior intelligence officers, ACE chiefs, right? Like, all, God forbid, targeting officers, collection managers, right? Like, you folks need to be engaged in this to look at the chops and go, whoa, 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 stop for 2 seconds. Look at these. Think. Okay, by the way, it's on the commander's decision support template. So go get the XO or the DCO in here or the DCGO, because you, young current lieutenant colonel or major, you're not authorized to make that decision. So
It also becomes amplified as you go up the joint level because, as we talked about in our previous episode, sensor weapons pairing isn't necessarily a
yeah,
thing that's been built
super
into the
important.
Army because we're used to, again, forward observer. Gray Eagle fixes everything. Gray Eagle
Yeah,
sees
Gray
horde moving. Yeah,
Eagle.
sees horde
Yeah,
moving. Adjust camera, fire mission. Adjust camera, fire mission. We're not
right,
attuned
right.
to things like as we onboard Prism, what Prism Increment 2,
Ink two.
Prism Increment 4 as that comes
Yeah,
out in the year, I don't know,
yeah,
3030, whatever. That if you move a sensor, now I no longer have sensor to shooter link because you've just desynced all of the technical linkages that
right.
allow that thing to go after an enemy radar that was emitting, an enemy radio that was emitting, whatever it is. It's like, oh, now you've just broken the link, and either the launcher needs to move or the sensor needs to move back. And we've just wasted time having to shuffle things around the battlefield, not thinking through it. And so, yes, as you move up the joint thing, the reason the Air Force is very deliberate in all of this is they go, if I move that capability, I've just broken the weapons link if I'm not paying attention to what's going on for beyond visual range
Absolutely.
engagements. And we
Yeah,
don't
no,
train
you're
that way.
absolutely correct. And no, we don't. And so here's what also kills me about collection, right? Like, we have the same, like, we wouldn't dare of doing this with artillery firing batteries and battalions, right? Like, we don't sit there, like, we go through a very methodical process to figure out this thing called priority of fires. Okay. So if I'm an artillery brigade commander and and I have a field artillery brigade, I'm the force field artillery headquarters for an entire corps, okay, or I'm a Divardi commander, okay, and I go, okay, I have X amount of firing platoons, batteries, and battalions that I am under command. My staff goes through an onerous process of going, piecing sometimes down to the individual gun or launcher, who's going, what's the priority in which they're going to process fire missions. Okay. So if I cut an artillery firing unit to a specific maneuver unit, and I say, listen, maneuver unit, from this date time group to this date time group, every fire mission you send up is number one for these guys. They are going to take, you're first in the checkout line, right? Like it's like Walmart. You're just number one, right? You're VIP lane all day for this firing unit. Okay. And so we go through this very onerous process of doing that. And so in the midst of a fight, if a firing unit all of a sudden has to stop shooting for one unit that it's been told, hey, these are priority of fire number one for you guys. Now you have to shift and fire for this other unit. Well, for that firing unit, that could be a big deal, right? Because for a cannon artillery, maybe they have to displace, right? Hopefully, at a minimum, they just have to relay the guns on a new general azimuth of fire. Well, my unit I was supporting was over. Well, you can't see my arms, but was 45 degrees on azimuth, and my new firing unit is now 120 degrees on azimuth. Well, guess what? I got to shift the guns, right? Which is a pain in the butt, but not terribly time consuming. Okay. Well, let's say it's something that I can't range. Well, now I've got to displace completely, right? I've got to march order the guns, right? I got to pack the firing point up. I got to march order the guns. I've got to move to a new firing location. I've got to recon it. I've got to do all of my emplacement techniques and tactics that I have to do to make sure the battery or the platoon gets in safely, right? And then I have to start recomputing from a new location. I've got to update MET. I've got to do all of these things to make sure I'm delivering, accurate and deliberate fire, or delivering accurate and timely fires. Okay. And so that's a big deal. Okay. Even for a HIMARS or a rocket launcher, right? I've got to, push the button, put the launcher back, and I got to stow everything, and I got to start rolling. Right. And oh, by the way, what else am I doing? I'm exposing myself because now I'm moving. Right. So we don't look at retasking artillery units whimsically like that, but we'll do it for target acquisition assets. It's like, come on now, let's just slow down and apply the same amount of, deliberative thinking to that, right? Instead of just the knee-jerk emotional reaction of, oh my God, somebody's in contact. That in and of itself, as we've discussed before, is a problem, because guess what? This is real war. Okay. You're going to be in contact 24/7 if you're on the line. Okay. I mean, that's positional warfare. Okay. Which everybody does. What kills me is we don't talk about positional warfare. There's been a few, and we can, I don't want to get too far into this, right? Because this is a whole nother topic, but positional warfare is exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now, right? It is not mobile warfare. It is not the German blitzkrieg across the plains of Poland. Okay. It is more like entrenched World War I, every man over the trench, blow the whistle kind of thing, positional warfare, right? So that in of itself means that everything that you're doing out there it's got to be very deliberative, right? Responding hastily is a recipe for losing people, losing resources, losing capabilities quite quickly.
And I would say the small drones, as drones become more prolific, when you go into small teams, very tactical operations, yeah, really good for that, where they can move around, you can chuck them up, all of these things. And that's what those scout teams are really built for. Once we go into, as MI kind of rolls back up, focused on the divisions, the S2s, the G2s need to be more deliberate in their target acquisition. It's more about engaging high value targets and less about reacting to what's happening on the flat.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to what we talked about in the previous episode, right? Like deep shaping fires, deep operations, right? Like if you're at the division in the Corps and you're reacting and pushing assets down to a direct fire engagement, okay, well then it better be because it's really important, right? And so that's what gets lost is, well, this isn't a vote, right? Like we don't get together in a committee and say, well, I think it's important. I think it's important. No, it's the commander's decision. Okay. And then again, if it's not the commander in the jock making the decision, then it better be somebody that he or her trusts implicitly to make that decision. What it shouldn't be is some chops who is just winging it, right? That's just terrible. That's a terrible idea. And I'm not saying there aren't good chops out there and they're super smart and they're up and comers and they're doing all that, and that's fine. But all of that needs to be laid out, right? They need to have a good decision support template that says, yep, I'm allowed to make this call. I'm not allowed to make this call, and we have to get back into that whole mindset. But yeah, target acquisition, I think, to get to the point where I think we're wrapping this up, is I think target acquisition as a process, okay, and with overarching principles, one, obviously it needs to be taught, two, it needs to be practiced, and three, it needs to be enforced, just like any other process that we do in the Army. So yeah, that's what I think is good to have this conversation, and I super hope that our Foxes and Fisters got something out of it. And remember, some of this answers is in the book, right? You must read ATP 309.12, ATP 309.12. So that's where it's at.
All right, this is where we're going to wrap this up because I think we've gone on long enough. But again, read, be stewards of your own profession. And to all the Foxes and Fisters out there, we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.